Holy humpback, Paul. That's some big beluga.
Indeed, Tim, and it belongs to Lorelei Circe.
You mean...
Exactly. It's the Whale of the Siren.
Holy high sea.
To the bat poles.
Welcome to the Bat Poles. Oh no, break out the podcaster repellent bat spray. This is Tim in Tokyo with my brother Paul in Hanover, New Hampshire. Our theme this time is from a Japanese YouTube channel called A-Channel, or the A-Channel, run by Atsushi Nakamura, who is presumably on stage in this concert video shot in 2006 and uploaded to YouTube September 21st, 2020. I couldn't find the name of the band anywhere in this channel, but it's a band of 4 middle-aged to elderly Japanese guys, 3 guitarists and a drummer. The first half of the video is their performance of the Napoleon solo theme from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., but it's very surfified and almost unrecognizable from the actual opening of Man from U.N.C.L.E. And then it cuts to their performance of the Batman theme, which you just heard there. And it's a pretty impressive performance. They're a pretty tight band.
I'll say, and from that distance, considering that they're all wearing, many of them seem to be wearing like sandy mop-top wigs, or at least one of them certainly does, I would not have had any indication that they were Japanese. Also, as I told Tim just a minute ago, they're way too good to be like playing for 2 guys eating dinner, which is basically the only group you can see in front of the stage.
Yeah, so I think I had said a while back I wasn't going to do any more Ventures versions of the theme, but that's what my collection is mostly breaking down to now. So I'm going to have to start looking for some more.
Maybe it's the Surf's Up, Joker's Under episode that somehow drives this, but there seems to be no end to the connections that people make between Batman and surfing and Beach Boys / Ventures / Dick Dale solos.
Well, I think a lot of these Ventures-related ones are by Japanese performers. And, I think I mentioned before, there's a certain generation here in Japan of maybe people who were teenagers in the 60s who love the Ventures. And I think the Ventures did the Batman theme, so these Ventures cover bands end up playing the Batman theme.
Well, I don't mind them if they're this good.
Yeah.
This is good. This is good. I could listen to this a lot.
All right, so we've got a double feature again this time. Later, we're going to talk about, at long last, an issue of the Batman 66 comic book, issue 8, about a year after we did number 7.
Right.
But first, we're going to talk about this video that was sent to us by Chris Kavanaugh. It's on YouTube. It's from the New Yorker, and it's about when Eartha Kitt went to the luncheon at the White House and got LBJ upset at her, let's say. The title on the YouTube video is When the Government Tried and Failed to Silence Catwoman. And they tie it in a lot to the fact that this happened just like a month after her first appearance on Batman. It would have been even sooner after her last appearance on Batman. Because, her 3 episodes appeared within 4 weeks. December 14th, December 28th, and January 4th.
Yeah, something I did not look up and should have, so somebody else could look this up, I suppose, is whether these episodes were rerun after the incident with Eartha Kitt at the White House.
Well, not on ABC, because we know that they did no summer reruns at all after they showed Minerva.
Yeah.
It was just gone. Mm-hmm. Rushed it into syndication, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they were showing, but it wasn't Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that would be interesting if there had been summer reruns. If the show had not been canceled, would they have shown those episodes or not?
Yeah, good question.
We'll never know that.
Yanked it in deference to the president or to the CIA, but we'll get into that a little more thickly in a few moments.
And the video opens with bits of that luncheon scene from the start of Catwoman's Dress to Kill, with Gordon giving a speech, accepting the award for Batgirl and not knowing that she's his daughter, and then Catwoman coming in and crying foul that she should be winning a Best Dressed award.
On behalf of Batgirl, Mayor Linseed, Chief O'Hara, the entire Gotham City police force, and myself, thank you, Mr. Gernrick. This award just goes to prove that there is room for style, even in crime fighting.
Ridiculous.
It's Catwoman!
I said ridiculous. Nonsense. Foolish prattle. How can Batgirl be the best anything when Catwoman is around?
I think that's kind of brilliant, because here's a society luncheon with women dressed. I mean, it's an awards ceremony, but it's also a kind of society luncheon with women wearing their leopard skin pillbox hats, not to, to quote Bob Dylan, but to connect that or present it as a kind of stand-in for the lunch itself is pretty brilliant.
I
Especially
love that.
Since Eartha Kitt basically breaks up the luncheon by being Catwoman and changing the rules, which is kind of what she did at Lady Bird Johnson's luncheon about crime, right? About crime and, well, specifically about youth of America and, attempting to bring up our kids so they, are, quote unquote, so they don't become hardened criminals down the road.
And the video adopts the typeface of the Batman credits to introduce kind of the main players in the story: Eartha Kitt, Lady Bird Johnson, and President Johnson.
And Lyndon B. Johnson as the president. Special guest villain, also starring. He's not the special guest villain, but that would be even funnier.
And so this was on January 18th of 68, and Lady Bird Johnson, whose initials are also LBJ, was holding this Women Doers Luncheon, DOER apostrophe, or S apostrophe, I should say, about crime in the streets. That was the topic. And since Eartha had done work with inner city kids, she was invited, and she didn't really want to go at first, but was kind of talked into it. Now, the audio in this, actually, this evening, it occurred to me a bit late to look around at some other sources besides this video. And I found out that up until 2020, they only had the film footage with no sound. And in 2020, at the LBJ library, they discovered the audio. Like some like separate tape, I guess.
A separate magnetic recording.
And so, we hear that in this video. But I found another video from 2 years ago. I forgot what the name of the channel was, but it was like a general American president's video channel saying that audio had just been discovered.
Well, that's really a find, especially for anyone who's interested in Eartha Kitt or in this particular event and the kind of clash between Kitt and LBJ, where she actually stands up and basically stops him from leaving the podium, which he does. He's walking away. He's done his bit for his wife's luncheon and is now headed out, and she basically blocks his exit. And asks him, I think it's worth playing the clip of, how that goes.
Yeah, it's a little hard to hear. The mic was not that close to them, but basically, so they've had lunch, they've had dessert, according to the other sources I looked at, and then LBJ stopped by and said a few words, and then, yeah, as he was leaving, she stood up.
Then he turned to leave, and Miss Eartha Kitt, who had been seated at the table close to the podium, rose in his path and said,
about delinquency in the United States, which we're all interested in, and actually that's why we're here today. But what do we do about delinquent parents? The parents who have to go to work, for instance, who can't spend the time with their children that they should. This is, I think, is our main problem. What do we do with the children then when the parents are off working?
She said, like, what should we done? We talked about delinquent children. What should we do about delinquent parents who have to go to work and may not be able to take care of their children? And LBJ's not really ready to answer any questions.
Clearly.
He just mentions that there was a Social Security bill passed this year that added millions and millions of dollars for daycare centers. And he adds that it came from a bunch of men who aren't the best judges of how to handle children otherwise.
And obviously he was not prepared to answer any kind of questions because I wanted to ask about the Social Security that we were beginning to get into knowledge about the fact that it won't be there.
Well, that Social Security bill that just passed this year sets up millions and millions of dollars for daycare centers where mothers can take their children to must work. That's one step that they're taking. And that comes from, that's approved by a bunch of men who are really not the best judges of how to handle children otherwise. I think that'd be a very good question for you to ask yourself and other women here, and y'all tell me what you.
So he says, I think that'd be a very good question for you to ask yourself and the other women here. You all tell them what you can do. And then he leaves. And, yeah, and after that, she's clearly angry. And so, yeah, this video has both audio of an interview with Eartha Kitt and then Lady Bird Johnson's audio diary.
That is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Who knew that she had it sounds as though she scripted it. Like she wrote out what she was going to say because she sounds as though she's reading. So there may be, written, there may be a written journal as well that accompanies it. But this audio diary idea is pretty avant-garde, I would say, for 1967 or 68.
Yeah. So, Lady Bird says that Eartha Kitt just sat there and smoldered and smoked. And you can see in the film that she's just sitting there smoking. And Lady Bird mentions she doesn't applaud for the other women who are getting up to speak. She doesn't eat anything. She just smokes and kind of sits there and frowns.
Lady Bird predicts that something's going to happen, that there's going to be some kind of blow up.
He sat down, stubbed out a cigarette, tossing her long hair. And from then on, I watched her, expecting something I didn't know what. Apparently, she did not eat, nor did she clap for any of the speakers. She smoldered and smoked.
After the luncheon, now we're supposed to get up and take our turn to give speeches. But all of them were catering to the fact that, what do you call that word? No, phoning up to the boss, so to speak. So when I raised my hand, she kept saying, "That's all right, Eartha. You will finally get your turn." I kept raising my hand.
I did not know what to expect, only that it would not be good.
So Lady Bird's kind of putting off letting her come up to speak. She keeps raising her hand. But then finally she gets her turn, and she says, I don't think we're really doing what the purpose of this luncheon was supposed to be.
When some speaker finished, I nodded to her. She rose and began to talk swiftly, passionately.
And I said, I think we've forgotten what the subject of this luncheon is all about. And I said, one of the reasons why our boys are running away from the United States, because they come to me wherever I am in the world, and they tell me what they feel.
The young people are angry. Their parents are angry because they are being so highly taxed. And then, mounting to a crescendo, she came to her real destination, to denounce the war in Vietnam.
Our position in Vietnam, they don't like it. We've been there long enough to realize we cannot win this war. So I told her what the kids had told me, the boys. That's why they smoke pot, because they just want to go to sleep until everything's all over.
And then, I mean, if she'd stopped there, I think she would have been okay. But then she, like, turns to Lady Bird as if she has any control over the situation and says, "You send the best of this country off to be shot and maimed," and goes on and on about that and talking about as if she's running the war.
And then, advancing a step toward me and looking with intense directness at me, "She's a good actress," she said. "You send the best of this country off to be shot and maimed. They rebel in the street. They will take pot, and they will get high. They don't want to go to school, because they're going to be snatched off from their mothers to be shot in Vietnam." I am glad to say I looked back just as directly, stare for stare. She continued, pointing a finger, the paper said. "Mrs. Johnson, you are a mother too, although you have had daughters and not sons. I am a mother, and I know the feeling of having a baby come out of my gut. I have a baby, and then you send him off to war. No wonder the kids rebel and take pot. And Mrs. Johnson, in case you don't understand the lingo, that's marijuana."
At the same time, it's, I can understand why she did this, because LBJ had just like taken off after basically saying, okay, we probably did it wrong, but it's up to you to do something different. Instead of even, he could have said, it's up to you to communicate to lawmakers what it is we should do. Instead, he says to her, you talk to, your people, your women, right? You talk to the other women in the room. And maybe even he's referring to like African Americans as if, she stands in for all African Americans or something. But whatever it is, he's basically saying, you folks deal with this. Let's talk about what you can do. And why he would say, after suggesting that millions and millions of dollars for daycare is a good thing, why he would then say that the men in Congress are probably not very well versed in understanding how to bring up children. What a stupid thing to say about lawmakers if you're a lawmaker and a man, and you ostensibly are going to stand up in front of television audiences at press conferences and say that this was a good thing. So I don't know why he's undermining his own, what he's, trying to present as a positive step in the direction of addressing the problem that Kitt has just, brought to his attention. Mm-hmm. But one way or the other, I can hardly blame her, I guess, in the moment anyway, for turning to Lady Bird since LBJ had left the room and, pointing at her as a representative of the White House. She's the closest thing in the room at that point to someone who represents LBJ's position.
Mm-hmm. Now, I found a Washington Post story from 2018, which was apparently written and published to mark the 50th anniversary of this incident. Mm-hmm. And, at that time, the audio hadn't been found yet, but the Post had reporters in the room at the luncheon, and this story was on page 1 with a big photo back in 68. Mm-hmm. And so there are quotes given based on what the reporters put in the story. And listening to the audio, I could see there were little differences, but it was basically accurate.
Mm-hmm. So there wasn't any real misreporting, just some nuances left out?
Yeah. But it mentions, now I'm not sure what they credit this to, if they talk to her, but it says to her, the other women in the room, seemed to want to talk about everything except the problems of juvenile delinquency. The women seemed more enamored with Lady Bird's plan to, quote, beautify America, unquote. All this talk about flowers when it seemed the world outside was blowing up. Kitt waited for her turn to speak. So, I mean, we in this video, we don't hear what the other women were saying. I don't know if there's a complete video out there on YouTube with all of the audio, but
you mean a complete recording of the entire event so we could hear the other women's speeches or extempore remarks?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be useful. And it would have been interesting to address that a little bit more in the documentary, although I realized that this is a short-form documentary.
Yeah, it's only 12 minutes.
It was always intended to be, right? And this is something I think The New Yorker has begun doing sometime in the last decade, these little documentaries for their web presence. Now, here's a thought. Maybe this isn't really a question, but just an idea to float out there. The fact that Kitt made a stink about Vietnam, about, why cultural and social and political reasons why kids might be dropping out of polite society and maybe turning to crime, maybe turning to pot, when she actually defines pot as marijuana specifically for Lady Bird, in case she doesn't know the slang.
Don't know the lingo.
With her, standing up like that, this is why I think the parallel that the documentary creates between Catwoman standing up and, basically, crashing the party and, destroying hats and, claiming her position as central. She's the best dressed woman in Gotham City. Yes, that's all presented in terms of feminine vanity, right? But in a way, she stands up. Kitt does something very similar at this luncheon, and basically critiques feminine vanity. The idea of beautification as being central to the whole reason for this luncheon, when it was supposedly about crime and supposedly about raising children in a way that would transform the country. There's something in that parallel that suggests, at least to me, that women who stand up and speak their mind are dangerous. In both cases. And that so, and her being Catwoman, the very nature of her intervention in that award ceremony is criminal. She breaks it up, but she breaks it up specifically to, perform criminal acts. And so there's kind of a suggestion here that, women who, well, you've probably seen the bumper sticker or heard the phrase that, women who, keep their place, or polite women rarely change the world. Women who, stick to, usual gender roles, definitely, don't, are not the ones who make big changes in the world that matter. But that act of breaking out of, conventional expectations of femininity, and probably, expectations of, a black woman specifically, are exactly what, could change the world, but also gets criminalized to the point where the CIA is actually opening a file on her and investigating her.
Yeah, and all her bookings are suddenly disappearing.
Right, no doubt because of federal intervention, not just, well, even William Morris, her talent agency, seems to have forgotten her address, she says.
Yeah.
The talent agency that she pays, to get her name out there and get her on talk shows and get her in cabarets and get her on tour. So, she was, criminalized. She was basically turned into Catwoman by the CIA's response.
Yeah, and then the New Yorker brilliantly, after explaining the luncheon, they go back to Batman and when Gordon says,
"Just a minute, Catwoman, you can't come here and disrupt a luncheon like this."
Or my awards.
Yes. Right. She was not a criminal because she spoke her mind, but she was made a criminal by the response, basically. She was, suspected of sedition or, betrayal or, all of the aspects of, free speech that we tend to think of as American. Like, it's the American right to speak one's mind and not be jailed for it or not be persecuted for it is precisely the American ideal that gets, kind of stepped on here and squashed mercilessly.
Now, the video doesn't go into much detail about Lady Bird's response. It mentions... you hear Lady Bird saying that one newspaper reported that she kind of grew pale and her voice trembled. That's what the Washington Post says. But other accounts said that Lady Bird was crying, which she denies in her audio diary, and Eartha says she didn't see any crying.
One paper said I was pale and my voice trembled slightly as I replied to Miss Kitt. I think that is correct. I did not have tears in my eyes, as another paper said.
Eartha Kitt made Mrs. Johnson cry. I didn't see her cry.
But I guess, even before the papers were, before the articles were written, there was already punishment because her ride didn't show up.
Yes, right. She basically had to hitchhike, she says,
Yeah.
in the voiceover from the later interview.
But yeah, the Post article quotes what Lady Bird said in response, which I don't think any of this is in the video. The quote is, "Because there is a war on, and I pray that there will be a just and honest peace, that still doesn't give us a free ticket not to try to work for better things, such as against crime in the streets, for better education, and better health for our people. Just because there is a war going on, I see no reason to be uncivilized." Kitt wrote, "I took it she was referring to me."
So this response wasn't directly spoken to Kitt with Lady Bird looking at Kitt when she said it, but rather maybe a kind of follow-up speech or a closing remarks bit or something.
Well, in the video, Lady Bird says that I think she says she did look straight at Kitt.
Okay. But she still kind of uses a version of the royal we, or, a general universal response rather than picking out Eartha Kitt rhetorically, but everybody must have known what she was talking about.
Yeah, unlike Kitt, she doesn't say you.
Yeah, she's being every bit the Southern lady. The crying and voice trembling stories are interesting as well, in terms of the notion that, women are, going to talk about beauty and flowers, even when they're talking about crime, and are not really going to do anything, or not expected to do anything substantial to change policy or suggest policy even. Basically Lady Bird is, turned into a woman with sensitive feelings by those news reports. Even if she didn't cry, basically everyone expects, oh, she's a woman, of course she's going to be crying about this.
So emotional, yes.
Yes, and she does. That's basically what happens in the news, even though it apparently didn't happen at the time. It was not a factually reported event.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, then it's not until now. The video says 1975. The Post says late 74. That Seymour Hersh from the New York Times called her and said that she was on a list that they had obtained of people that the CIA had been tracking. And that article appeared in the in the New York Times on January 2nd of 75. So it does sound like really 74 is when she was contacted by him. And when they're telling that story in the video, they show her on one end of the phone and Peter Salinger on the other end in his role in the Joker Catwoman team up with the picture of Richard Nixon on his desk.
Yeah, that part is hilarious, since, Hersh was no fan of Nixon. In fact, I think it was Hersh who broke the Pentagon Papers.
That sounds right.
An excellent investigative journalist right up through the 80s and 90s. Not a fan of the Vietnam War. No wonder he was the one to tell Kitt specifically what had happened, or that the CIA had been on her tail. I have so much even more respect for Eartha Kitt now than I did before, just to see her sitting there basically in no makeup, just, there to do business, right? There to actually try to make something of this ladies who luncheon, something that might be important enough. And it did make the front page. But, it suggested that yet another high-profile person was, found the war to be untenable and reprehensible and destructive, both of Americans in general and of the youth of America specifically. I mean, there is a pretty colossal irony in going to, talk about how, crime is harming our children when, one of the things that's probably harming, slightly grown-up children even more egregiously and universally is the draft, and sending them, off to Vietnam to fight a war that was pretty clearly unwinnable. And how many months was it after this? After this event,
2 months later?
That LBJ announced that he was not.
No, that was 10 weeks later, I think. 10 weeks after that. But what was it? 2 weeks later was what, the Tet Offensive?
Yes, and then 10 weeks later, LBJ says, not running for president again. Nope, not going to happen.
Yeah, the January 19th, 1968 front page, it's not the main headline of the page, but the headline on that article, Eartha Kitt confronts the Johnsons. And there's a photo of her standing next to Lady Bird.
So, from a Batman 66 perspective, it is, kind of, especially awful that this breakthrough role for Kitt, an African-American woman with a leading role, a featured role, anyway, even if it's a guest starring role.
Yeah, the only black villain in the history of the show.
That's right, and a black woman to boot. Has broken through primetime. And then for this to happen, even though I would say that it was a feather in her cap, I'm sure there were other Americans, both black and white, who thought so at the time too, were, for the, this basically, ended up yanking her star out of the firmament of Hollywood at the very moment at which it looked as though, some breakthroughs, maybe other breakthroughs were going to follow as well.
Yeah, so she spends the next decade performing mainly in Europe, but then she gets invited back to the White House in 1978 by the Carters, and she is back on Broadway in 1978 too. The hit musical Timbuktu, for which she earned a Tony nomination.
Okay, well, I guess all was forgiven by then.
Yeah, so well, I don't know when Lady Bird passed away. I know LBJ was gone.
Lady Bird passed away quite a bit later, I think, maybe even the 80s.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I remember her passing away. Well, I remember LBJ passing away too. I was in second grade. And the flag outside the school was at half staff, and we talked about that in class.
Gosh, she died in 2007. Lady Bird Johnson died at the age of 94 in 2007.
Oh, wow. But yeah, I mean, she had her comeback. So that's nice to know. She wasn't in the wilderness for the rest of her life. Right.
The Times article on Kitt's visit to the White House in 1978 is titled, Carter Greets Eartha Kitt at White House where she shocked Mrs. Johnson in 1968. This is January 30th of 1978. I'm glad to have you back, the president said to the actress Eartha Kitt, who had not been to the White House since 1968 when she gave her outspoken views against the Vietnam War. I took that as a personal message, Miss Kitt said at the president's greeting. That's very interesting. Oh, and however, it was buried on page 19 of Section A, halfway down the page, next to the obituaries, I think.
Eartha Kitt goes to the White House and doesn't get anybody upset at her is not much of a headline.
No, I realize that, but it would have been kind of nice if it had been a little closer to page 1, so there's a kind of response to an historical moment or, an echo of an historical moment that is now kind of a besmirchment of the White House, on the White House's part, not on Kitt's part, that is now being reversed. So we should mention the name of the director, at least, of this documentary. His name is Scott Kalanico. I don't know anything else about what Kalanico has done, but it's a very cleverly constructed little 12-minute bit that is, probably great for, New Yorker readers who are, commuting to have a look at, quickly and learn something about an historical moment that is, both about American politics and American entertainment, as well as, African-American experience. So, good stuff.
Jack Kirby's 1960s Marvel Comics work with Stan Lee created some of the most fondly remembered comics of the 20th century. If you're like us, you probably know about his early 1970s work for DC, but you've read little or none of it. Here at Deconstructing Comics, Emmett and I decided to change that. We've launched into a series of episodes in which we read all of Kirby's Fourth World, from the first appearance of Darkseid in Jimmy Olsen's book, to the long-delayed finale, The Hunger Dogs. What we found is unrestrained creativity that's a bit rough around the edges. This is Tim. Join us as we visit the wild area, the planets of New Genesis and Apocalypse, plus good old Metropolis, as we read Jimmy Olsen, The Forever People, New Gods, and Mr. Miracle. We're at deconstructingcomics.com or look for Deconstructing Comics wherever you find your podcasts.
Hello, I'm Ken Holzhauser, and if you're looking for something new in comic books, may I recommend my newest comic, The Quick and the Dad, a love letter to the DC, Marvel, Archie, and Harvey comics of my youth. This comic has everything. It has spaceships, dad jokes, alien invasions, time travel, supervillains, and so many bad puns. Hopefully you'll like it. It's the cutest comic you've never heard of, and it's available today in print and digital from indieplanet.com. That's The Quick and the Dad. Join that other dynamic duo, won't you?
Now, back to King Tut.
Right, so Batman 66 issue 8, dated... Is it dated at all? Let's see, the back, the end, April 2014.
You know, can I just make a complaint about the Batman 66 collections? Wouldn't it be nice if they had, if the covers, and I realize it's fun to see the covers without the logos and the DC bullet and all of that stuff. It's kind of nice to see the whole of the Michael Allred art on many of these covers. The bad news is, how do you find out which issue it is? I mean, from the back cover of the trade paperback collection, this is Batman 66 issues 6 through 10, but there's no indication of which issues the stories are in the tables of contents. So you basically have to count covers, and it's hard to find the covers a little bit anyway when you're just flipping through, since there are no logos, no issue numbers, no bullets, no nothing. So I find that pretty aggravating when you're trying to find a specific issue.
Well, it sounds like they don't know their audience, because comics geeks always want to know stuff like which issue is which,
Yeah, absolutely. Could there be maybe there's an interest, there's a deflection of that interest in keeping up with the issue numbers, since this was originally a webcomic, which I'm reminded of every time I turn a page and notice that there's some kind of gutter or other separation indication between the tops and bottom halves of each page.
Yes.
Which really bugs me sometimes. I try not to notice it, but I can't help it. But maybe because this appeared in, as individual webcomic stories initially, maybe that's one reason why the editors are not so concerned about that. But I just still like to lodge a general complaint about a series that was canceled a long time ago. But maybe this is a more general complaint about other DC trade collections as well. I don't know. I haven't looked at any other DC trade collections in some time.
Yeah, so the main story is King Tut Barges In, written by Jeff Parker and art by Ruben Procopio. And as the title suggests, we do see King Tut and his retinue on the barge. Not the barge with 4 wheels, but a barge out on the river.
Right. Which is not the Nile, but you'd think that it was, since there are palm fronds all over the barge. And, at the bottom of the first page of the story, when the title and the credits show up, one might be fooled into thinking that those palm fronds are actually on the shore, but in fact they're just behind columns in the barge. So it does look a little bit more like the Nile. Of course, you can't really deny the Gotham City skyline, however, behind it.
Yeah.
So not so Nile-like, at least not in whatever century BC Tut is supposed to hail from.
Now, on this first page, Robin refers to him as Dr. William McElroy. Now, I don't think the show ever gave him a first name.
Mm-hmm.
I think it wasn't even until near the end that they even mentioned McElroy.
Right.
But I figure, since McElroy was William Dozier's middle name, it makes sense that King Tut's first name would be William, just like Dozier's first name was William.
Good point.
And on the barge, there's a version of the quote-unquote Sphinx statue from the first 2 Tut arcs, although it's smaller than the one that was in the show.
Mm-hmm. You're referring to the one behind his throne?
Yeah.
Or that maybe is his throne. A little difficult to tell.
Yeah, I think the chair is separate, but we don't really get a good look at it. So, yeah, the barge is coming down the river. Batman and Robin, assuming that there's crime going on, find a way to get out there onto the barge. Batman says, "This isn't the Nile, Tut," and Robin says, "But whatever your plan is, you can bet we'll send you up the river." Kind of like that.
Yeah, pretty decent 66-ish dialogue for sure.
But actually, there doesn't seem to be anything illegal going on.
Yeah, and that was kind of a nice touch that's reminiscent of, Penguin going straight. Not yet, he ain't. The Batman and Robin immediately assume, rightly, that there's something, very wrong going on here. But at the moment, they're semi-humiliated. Not really humiliated in this case, not publicly, in the same way that they're humiliated by the Penguin. But nevertheless, they basically just have to be escorted by Tut's men off the barge because there's nothing they can do if nothing illegal is actually being done at that moment.
Now, I thought it was interesting here that Parker has Tut kind of adapting to the time that he's in, where like on the show he always seemed to be like he didn't realize that he wasn't in the time of King Tut. Where here he's saying, "I fully plan to take over the modern Thebes, Batman, but I'm going to do it the American way. I'm going to buy it." Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a slightly different Tut, which suggests a kind of character arc of, growth over time, but also a kind of return to roots that the show never delved into. That is his role as a researcher. Right, if he's an academic, if he's teaching at Yale, he must be an archaeologist of some
an Egyptologist.
Well, yes, but he must have, he must be researching ancient Egypt in various ways. Maybe he even knows the language. That's not something. Of course, that gets addressed, but only in terms of his Tut identity. But in the series itself and the show, there's no use made of the fact that he understands and can use knowledge of his background as an academic. And in this in this issue, not only is he growing in the sense of realizing that there are other ways to skin a cat, that he might be able to buy his way into owning the modern Thebes of Gotham City. But he actually uses his research and his knowledge of Egyptian languages to basically get back to the past.
Right.
So he's an academic again as well. And he even plays the role of William McElroy in order to, get himself into the Gotham. Is it the Natural History Museum?
Yeah, that was an interesting one too. That he pretends to be McElroy, which is another thing we never saw on the show.
Yeah, he denies that identity, vehemently on the show.
But then a few panels later, he's saying that the blow to my skull didn't induce schizophrenia. It allowed the higher functions of my brain to recognize my past life as the monarch of Egypt. Mm-hmm. So, yes, that's some more
contemplative Tut
growth. Yeah. Where, like, on the show, Tut, just disdains McElroy if he realizes that there's a McElroy at all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and considering that there is a kind of supernatural / metaphysical bent to this story, in that Tut and his men his people actually returned to ancient Egypt in order to legitimately trade for these baubles and tiaras and other 24-karat gold riches, so that they can amass enough wealth to buy Gotham City. They're set to 1292 BC. The idea that Tut might be the blow to his head, the many blows to his head, might have gotten him back in touch with his past self, might actually be true, rather than just like delirium and a psychotic fantasy. And that leads me to the biggest problem I have with this story, if I have a problem, and that is they go back to 1292 BC. They really go back to 1292 BC to trade chocolate, basically Hershey bars, which the Egyptians, obviously ancient Egyptians, have, no experience of in order to pick up, all the loot they can.
Yeah, when you do stuff like that never happened on the show, it's going another level of unreality beyond what was on the show, and having time travel, it feels a bit different.
Yeah, it's a bit like when Green Hornet jumped the Hornet with visitors from outer space. Or, briefly, watching the Joker's Flying Saucer, I was afraid that was where Batman was going, too. At least, this time around. I thought, oh, wow, could season 3 get any worse?
Well, there was that one character who was, I think, really an alien, wasn't he?
Yeah, I guess you're right. Well, he looked like something out of a Sid and Marty Krofft show. So, yeah, I have some real problems with that. Although, it brings up new possibilities for what's plausible in the Batman 66 universe, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. Because, for one thing, I can imagine Dozier saying, no, we can't afford to rebuild 1292 BC Egypt, so don't even think about it. It's not a creative difference, it's a budgetary difference that he would have with that idea.
Maybe, but I think Semple would not allow time travel in the script either.
Yeah, I'm quite certain of
Hoffman,
that,
who knows, but...
Yeah.
Now, the Batman 66 geek in me was upset about something here.
Okay.
So when they're in 1292 BC, and Batman and Robin end up amongst a bunch of alligators. Are they crocodiles or alligators?
Crocodiles.
Some kind of animal like that. Well, crocodile. Okay, yeah.
Crocodilus niloticus.
Yeah. So Batman says, fortunately, I altered the bat shark repellent for Crocodilus niloticus. I had two problems with that. One, bat shark repellent is not what it's called in the movie. It's the shark repellent bat spray.
That's right.
And secondly, in the movie, we see that there's a whole selection of sprays to use against various creatures, rather than, I have to alter the one existing repellent spray to a different animal.
Yeah, good point. I guess I was irritated not for purist reasons, but for two other reasons beyond what you're suggesting. One is that it's completely implausible that he's going to change out the spray in an aerosol can on the fly. What's he going to do? How's he going to reseal and, pump the pump the biocarbons back into the can? But, maybe that's not the point. But Batman can do anything, right? So we'll set that difference aside.
Sounds like he had anticipated that with Tut he was going to be end up facing crocodiles, and so he had brought this along.
Well, yes, I suppose.
But he says,
so.
I imagine 2 or 3 stolen from the zoo, not a Nile full.
But, on page 63, clearly that's supposed to be the moment where he says, bat crocodile repellent, or, here's what I've altered. He pulls out the can, but he's not saying anything about the can or about the crocodiles. That is clearly the moment that the artist intended, that Batman would say, here it is. But because of the need for him to say, apparently, I expected brute lizards as Tut is fond of them, etc., etc. I mean, yes, he does have to express his expectation of, his preparedness for the crocodiles, as you just mentioned. But the timing is off. Like there's a disconnect. This is a kind of Marvel method moment gone wrong, where the artist drew from the script, literally drew from a plot rather than from a full script, I would think. And then the script had to catch up with what was going on in the art. So it's a moment where the seams show in a way that I don't really appreciate.
Yeah. Now I think when we talked about the earlier issues, we did have some listeners who said they didn't really mind the comics doing things that the show couldn't or
Sure.
wouldn't.
Sure.
So, and just a matter of attitude, I guess. I mean, if you accept those, I think the story is fine.
Yeah, it's sufficiently 60-60 enough, I think. I don't really like Batman calling Robin young Ward in the Batcave. Why not just call him Robin? I mean, why call attention to a speech pattern that Batman never used in the show, or a tick that he never...
At least he didn't call him Boy Wonder.
Well, no, I agree. And thanks to you, I'm always on the lookout for that. I'm a deputy sheriff of the Boy Wonder police right along with you.
And he does call him Old Chum a few times in this issue.
Yeah, I think Procopio is really good at what he does, and I like the cartooniness as well as the decent resemblances to the characters. I like the fluidity of the fight scenes and the way that he designs pages, even despite of in spite of the brokenness of the page compositions. He does seem to be thinking in terms of full pages rather than in terms of half paper pages like the webcomic demanded. But there is a problem with storytelling here that I found a little off-putting, and I'm sorry, I seem to be pretty critical of a lot of things about the story today. Maybe it's just my mood because I lost an important piece of bat notes that I can't put my hands on, so I'm frustrated with myself about that. But where is the moment at which Batman, Robin, and the Tut Gang actually return through the portal to get back to Gotham City and the Natural History Museum?
Well, so when Batman and Robin are saying, "Excuse us, ancestors, crime fighters from the future coming through," I think they're heading towards the door. We don't actually see them go through it.
Right, and there's a bunch of there's blank backgrounds basically. There's a little bit of dust, the kind of the Archie got hit in the head, balls that appear in the air that appeared when Batman suggested the threads of reality were kind of coming unstitched or unwoven.
You're talking about on the next page where we see Tut and his people coming through.
Yeah, so we see, these kind of narration, this moment of visual narration that they might be coming through the portal. But because the backgrounds for the next two pages are completely abstract, they're these, non-symmetrical parallelograms. They're not even parallelograms. They're just, rectangles of various proportions and shapes behind them. It's great visual art. It's, great, it's nice visual design. But I'm just having a hard time, seeing the moment or thinking of the moment where they're actually coming through because it feels like the art is equivocating about where they are at that point. But are they actually in the portal fighting each other?
I utterly disagree because we see them coming out of that sarcophagus, and that's the portal.
I thought they were going out of the sarcophagus at that point.
They are. They're coming out of the past back into the present, coming out of the sarcophagus.
Okay, well, I thought when the what's his name Waylon in his modern dress, when one of the other henches says, "Don't get sick, big guy. We need you to lift this thing." I thought they were lining up to go into the portal at that point.
No. Now I'm not sure what thing he's talking about. Are they going to take the portal with them?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, so yeah. Well, Tut says, now we have to move the sarcophagus to my own temple before the museum opens.
Okay. All right. So I was irritated needlessly. We'll have to go back and trim out all that tape.
I will agree in that I would have appreciated a shot of Batman and Robin coming through because when I saw Tut and his people coming out, it wasn't clear to me if Batman and Robin had succeeded in beating them through the portal until the next panel when we see that they're there. So I was momentarily confused about who came out first, but...
Well, yeah, I guess that's the other reason why I had trouble understanding whether they were going in or coming out, is that Batman and Robin are in front of them. Wouldn't they have passed each other on the way to the portal? since this is happening like a single page later, and we might assume from the fact that Batman and Robin are still running toward the portal on page 87 of the collection, and on page 88, Tut and his men are already coming through the portal, or they're like in the portal and then coming out of it.
There's some time skipped because Batman and Robin have been watching Tut and his people with the pharaoh of that time in this tent, and then Batman says, "Come on, Robin, we need to get back to the Horemheb sarcophagus before Tut does." And so they're running back past a bunch of ancient Egyptians, and then we skip ahead in time a bit to after they have already gotten back to the present, and then Tut and his people are coming through.
Okay, yeah, I guess you're right. You must be. There's no other way for it to make any sense. But I think it's at the very least I could have used a bat spin, so that we're not just thinking that this is continuous time between Batman and Robin running for it, and Please say that you have to admit that keeping the background completely abstract for 2 full pages doesn't make any of this, any of the difficulty I'm expressing any easier to parse out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a bat fight, so the artist, I guess, felt like, we don't really need to show place. We just need to have various shapes to kind of accent the action. But
I guess, but in what bat fight were props not used that were appropriate to the space?
That's true, too.
Wouldn't that have been great, to throw ancient Egyptian, pottery at each other and have Batman and Robin scrambling to keep it from breaking? Anyway, okay, so I'm protesting too much, quite clearly. But at least it got me excited about something and thinking about something other than the big pile of notes I lost.
Now, I was kind of wowed by the fact that the backup story, Showdown with Shame, is by the same artist, Ruben Procopio, but now he's using watercolors.
Oh, dude, the backup story I have is The Butler Did It.
Oh, really?
Yes, by Tom Peyer, our friend Tom Peyer, with Chris Spruce and Carl Story.
Interesting. So did they cut out the backups or shuffle things around? Or
they might have shuffled things around. You're reading from the web?
I'm reading a paper copy that I bought back in 2014.
Oh, I see. Yeah, they must have mixed them up there's another good reason to fire the editor of the collection. Yes, it's in issue 9. It's the backup of issue 9 in this collection.
Huh. Okay.
So, whoops. Well, Tim, tell us about the story that was actually published there. Yeah, okay. It's a nice, interesting watercolor, no panel borders, which is also kind of cool. Very different Procopio work, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, of course, it's happening out west, and Shame is robbing people. He's robbing someone who's been mining for gold. Did they go back to 1849 here?
It sure looks like it.
And one of Shame's henchmen is this American Indian who actually, he went to Yale. He speaks English very well, but Shame wants him to act like a Indian from a Western movie.
1,000 pardons, Shame. I mean, ugh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a funny twist on the entirety of 66 Batman's refusal to acknowledge that there are Indians in the 20th century who act like 20th century citizens.
Yeah, so I appreciated that, and I appreciated the art. Shame robs a train full of rich tourists who think that he's part of the show at first.
Yes, and who wouldn't? He's Cliff Robertson in a cowboy costume.
But then they start to realize that he's really robbing them, but then one of the passengers ends up being Batman in a cowboy hat.
And not just any cowboy hat, but basically Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name cowboy hat. I'm surprised he's not wearing a poncho, although his cape is kind of wrapped over him like a poncho.
Yeah, it's working as a poncho here.
Makes him a cross between Zorro, Bruce Wayne's childhood hero, and Clint Eastwood.
Now, I'm wondering if they shuffled it in your book because There's a footnote here. Well, when Batman says, "I was brought out west by Zelda the Great and heard of your crimes," and there's a footnote that says you can read about that adventure in our next issue. And maybe they shuffled it in the book so that it would happen chronologically, put it after the Zelda story.
Right, yeah, because the Zelda story is the lead story in issue 9.
Yeah.
Zelda's Great Escape. Yes, I'll bet you're right. And maybe it was originally scheduled for issue 9 rather than issue 8, but...
Yeah, it does seem kind of weird that they would do that on purpose and...
Yeah, it does.
Put it in out of sequence. But, yeah, maybe the intended backup wasn't done yet, or there was just an... if there were an accidental switch, there wouldn't have been a footnote. But, yeah, maybe the backup that was meant to be for 8 wasn't done yet. The Tom Pyre story. So, I don't know that I have anything more to say about it, but I thought the Shame story was pretty good, and it's really nice to look at.
It is nice to look at. It actually reminds me immediately of some of the more recent Jonah Hex Western stories that DC has been doing, where, they're kind of experimenting with a more painterly look and kind of watercolor look from time to time. But Procopio's quite a good watercolorist and still manages to get some really fun caricatures out of the Adam West Batman in the last few pages, while still making these images look even more photographically based than some of his stuff in the previous story. I'm looking at 3 pages from the end of the Shame story where Bruce or Batman is wearing his wide-brimmed hat, and he's being kind of shown us from below so that the hat is like a big circle around his head. I don't think I've ever seen Adam West make an expression like that. Yeah, that's it. But I could totally believe it. It feels like it still feels like his face.
Yeah, it feels like a photo, or like a traced photo, maybe traced with watercolors.
Yeah, and the same goes for the central panel at the bottom row of the next page, where he's surprised by the fact, I guess, that.
Well, they're on top of the train, Batman and Shame is saying he's going to draw and shoot, and if Batman refuses to draw his gun, he's going to get shot.
But yeah, there's another moment where we're seeing an expression that I've never seen Adam West make, and it's still convincing as an Adam West image. So, wow. It's really remarkable stuff, and the layout is just as much fun and just as dynamic as the pen and ink layout of the previous story.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I've rarely seen watercolor like this in mainstream comics. Once in a while, like in a Marvel backup story in an annual or something, you might see a short Spider-Man story watercolored, but it's pretty rare.
Well, yeah, never in the newsprint era.
No.
I can't imagine watercolor ever, showing up in newsprint. It would have been a total waste. It actually reminds me of some of the watercolor stories from Epic Illustrated in the 80s, around the time of the Last Galactus story by Byrne that was running. That was the only time we ever bought Epic. Of course, then Epic ended before the Last Galactus story was even over. It was canceled. In any event, this is a good issue. Despite all of my loud, increasingly angry complaints about the King Tut story, this is one of the best issues I can remember overall.
Okay.
I didn't like the Egbert story all that much. It was okay, but it was kind of slight. Although it's interesting, we'll talk about it next time, obviously. Next time we talk about an issue of Batman 66. But briefly, anyway, the story, preview of coming attractions, the Tom Pyre story is about Egbert, that is Alfred's cousin, getting out of jail and then bonking Alfred over the head and taking his place so that he can rob the wall safe at Wayne Manor. What I liked about the story from a kind of Tom Pyre-centric position is that it's kind of like evil Alfred knocks over good Alfred and takes his place, which is kind of the premise of the Wrong Earth stories. It's a version of that premise and with an interesting twist. But the story itself, feels kind of slight. but not bad, but still, kind of slight. But these two stories are pretty epic, and I think the second story is, one I'm definitely going to go back and read in full after having flipped through it and found the art to be so compelling.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Batgirl to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Batgirl to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Batgirl for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Batgirl to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not. Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't. And of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzinski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Batgirl to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
Coming up, Burt Ward on kids' hero worship of Batman, and Adam West on whether he has anything in common with the Caped Crusader, as we finish listening to the bonus interview from the Batman the Movie DVD. Also, a mishmash of mail in the Bat inbox, and we announce the next script we'll discuss on the show. Help support To the Bat Polls and all the Deconstructing Comics shows with a monthly donation to the Deconstructing Comics Patreon page at patreon.com/deconcomics. For just $2 a month, you get outtakes from every To the Bat Polls episode, plus Paul and I make bi-weekly videos for all patrons, usually featuring a trivia quiz on TV or music from the late 20th century, or another topic that strikes our fancy. Further perks at higher support levels, including the right to have an ad for your own project on the show once a month, and hours of podcasts on the early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man and on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So go to patreon.com/deconcomics and select the level of your monthly donation. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
Kids love Batman. It's hero worship. It's clean. It's wonderful entertainment, and it's something the family can enjoy together. And I think what's going to be interesting about this DVD is I think there's going to be a lot of DVD equipment that is worn out with Batman being played over and over and over, because these kids, they love this hero worship. Every kid in the world wants to be a superhero.
I had very little in common with Bruce Wayne. The only thing I think I had in common with Batman really was a moral fiber. I was taught early on to be honest and not take myself too damn seriously.
Bat Inbox. This time it's a mishmash of responses to various episodes. So, Paul, take the first one.
Okay, here we go from High C, from the message board on episode 177 about Stanford Sherman's Marcia. Marcia. I agree with Paul that Carolyn Jones's performance is very good for what it is trying to be, but, in my opinion, it wasn't what the show needed at this juncture. I mean, and this isn't a knock at you guys, but look at the two screen grabs Tim chose for your episode. Jones is doing a sitcom-y double take in both. As much as I've criticized Julie Newmar's jocular Season 2 line readings, the only real sitcom eye roll she would do was the Why Can't I Get Good Help Dick York-esque slow burn. Ooh, wow. Dick York and Julie Newmar spoken in the same sentence. Holy paradox. Holy non sequitur. Holy, buzzkill. Other than that, I don't recall too many double takes. Fair enough.
Okay, next is an email from Rick Napoli about episode 178 on the film Batman and Bill. And of course, he was the one who suggested that we talk about that film.
That's right.
He says, catching up with current episodes of To the Bat Poles, I was pleased to hear you guys focus on the Bill Finger saga. I got exactly what I was looking for in your discussions of the, quote, shop paradigm, unquote, and the Siegel and Schuster comparison. By the way, rewatching Batman after having earned the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in Batman 66 from Young University is an interesting perch from which to view classic television. I note the director and writer for each episode, and I'm constantly on the lookout for Civic Responsibility Batman and Poor Deluded Girls. And I find I'm quite the admirer of Dozier for having breathed life into the whole absurd package.
Young University. Well, what would our postgraduate degree be in? Oh, yeah, Batman 66. Well, I did mention to Rick in a response to his very kind message that, you can't really make any more money from graduating from Young University with a Batman 66 degree than you can with an English degree, which both Tim and I have. So, yes, I think, pre-unemployment is what you and your friends used to call it in college.
Okay, yeah, I guess I do remember that.
Yeah. Or pre-flipping burgers out of the back of a truck is what I used
Or
to
what
think.
came to my mind was quoting from a certain commercial, my options are wide open, automotive or diesel.
Oh, man, yeah, that was one of those late night TV commercials from Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
DeVry?
I believe so, yes. My options are wide open, automotive or diesel. That reminds me of, I think this must have been in a parody of somebody watching late night television, but an ad began with the words, if you're watching this right now, you're probably not where you want to be. Which suggests that everybody who watches television at 2 a.m. is a total loser, who clearly doesn't have anywhere to go the next day, and, is finishing off his third bag of Doritos at that point. Anyway, none of that applies in this case, Rick. I'm sure that you'll go very far with your degree from Young University, which is, by the way, after the scandal of Trump University, a totally legit school where you're totally accredited. It's the real thing.
Okay.
So let's see. Batwinged Hornet on the message board thread about episode 179 on the film Star Trek versus Batman. Oh, good. We did get... Somehow I missed this on the message board. Nice show, guys, because I didn't know we'd gotten any responses to Star Trek versus Batman. Nice show, guys. I remember finding this interesting when it was originally released, but overall, Star Trek versus Batman became a primer for fan film concepts that do not really work together. The actress in the role of Catwoman gave the best performance of the fan film, while the Joker was just annoying. Ronald McDonald, indeed. Christopher Allen said, whatever cheap content was out there on Star Trek, was a dime a dozen. I have to disagree with that in terms of how Paramount sold the series. In the 70s, Star Trek had a second life that hit pop culture like an earthquake. It was a major winner in syndication, often advertised as that series you had to watch. In fact, Star Trek was such a phenomenon that the two-part The Menagerie was regularly broadcast as a special movie event on stations such as KTLA, Channel 5 in Los Angeles, while the channel still broadcast the series on the regular schedule. In local and national TV guides of the 70s, the series was always advertised for various channels, usually a half column with a photo of Kirk, Spock, and the USS Enterprise. Regarding the cost of the series for syndication, Paramount made a fortune from the series and created more tension between the studio and Roddenberry, which I do not believe would have been the case if it was one of those series that was practically given away by the studio. Paul, you thought the jump into the Guardian of Forever was random, but it was timed by Spock. At the time McCoy jumped through, Spock used his tricorder to record the images from time, so he was able to locate and get a general estimate of the period McCoy altered. So Kirk's and Spock's jumping was as precise as possible. Yeah, true. But I guess my reaction, you're absolutely right about that. My question had more to do with how they got back, I guess. How did they find a portal, or make a portal, or summon a portal?
What do you jump through when you're on the other side?
Yeah, when you're back in time, cozying up to to Siren, to Joan Collins, just having watched her die. How do you get back? And that exactly. So that I guess was I should have been clearer about what was bugging me. Although
you're not
I was
supposed
never
to think about that.
It's true, but I was. It's just that the show's over. The story's over, so they need to get back to the planet so they can get back to the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
That's the motivation. But at the same time, I was never all that convinced that Spock was going to be accurate about exactly when to jump, because if time is moving that fast, and it's speedy travel from pretty much the Big Bang through to the moment when Joan Collins' character passes, gets hit by a car. How do you know that when you jump, the moment you jump is the moment you should have jumped, or the moment you should have actually been in the past? Because if time is moving that fast, the moment between jumping and being actually in the portal is probably like a decade, right? Or at least. So anyway, again, things you're not supposed to think about, but you're right, Batwing Hornet, that there was in fact some motivation given to or a suggestion of how they could do this accurately.
Yeah. If you're about to jump and then you sneeze, you end up in like 1959. Like, whoops.
Wow. And, it's funny how everybody's goose-stepping to work in downtown New York today.
Yeah, with the change in time, that would be a big problem.
Just a little bitty issue. Just a snag.
Finally, email from Stephen Small. You guys probably know this already, but I see Michael Keaton will play Batman in the upcoming Batgirl film. Also, the upcoming Flash film. I don't know what's going on here with this Michael Keaton Batman comeback, but...
This is total news to me. I thought I was keeping up with the Batman news, but it's like, oh yeah, I still need to go see Robert Pattinson, do his growl, which I have not yet done, and drive around in his souped-up Dodge Batmobile. I can hardly wait for that. I know it's not a...
with the muffler dragging on the pavement.
Yeah, but it's basically an American, 70s muscle car from what I've seen. So I could be wrong about that, but I love thinking about it in those terms.
No Robin and no Chief O'Hara. The fourth will come to pass. So I guess he's saying that Keaton coming back is equivalent to having a fourth season?
Or maybe a fourth, no.
Well, I didn't put it in here, but the subject line of the email was the fourth season.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. This next thing is wishful thinking on my part. Because of the Star Trek vs. Batman podcast, I would like to point out that the Bat communicator from Batman 66 and the Klingon translators used by Kirk and McCoy from Star Trek 6 can be distant cousins. I don't know that I ever saw Star Trek 6.
Is that the Undiscovered Country?
Maybe. I don't think I ever saw it. The last one I saw was the one with the whale. That was what?
That's 4.
4. Okay.
Yeah, so 5 is the one directed by William Shatner, whom almost no Star Trek fan I have spoken with lately has any interest in even acknowledging its existence. But number 6 has Christopher Plummer as a Klingon, and it's pretty good. It's also Nicholas Meyer, coming back to direct and I think co-write the script after having left the franchise alone since Star Trek 2. So yeah, it's good stuff. But I'll have to go back and watch it again. I'd forgotten about the translators. This is where Christopher Plummer utters the immortal line, "I think Shakespeare sounds best in the original Klingon." Awesome. Brilliant.
I'm still working on my viewing of the whole original series. I'm 3 episodes into season 3.
Yes.
And then I'm going to watch all the movies.
Wow. Okay. I watched Star Trek the motion picture for the very first time just last summer, and was pretty impressed, although I had zero expectations because I'd heard it was basically, the longest slow-moving tracking shot of all time. Yeah, but, there are some pretty glorious images of the rebuilt, remodded Enterprise, which the camera can't get enough of. But I just found all that pretty pleasurable because I hadn't paid, $20, including popcorn to see it in a movie theater, I suppose.
Yeah, I saw 2, 3, and 4 in the theater, and I never saw any of the others. So, we got no takers on the back question in episode 179, which was, name a story from the show that was good till the end, but the ending could have been better. How would you improve that ending? But we're still going to answer it for ourselves anyway, so...
Yeah, that turned out to be a hard question, and it took a lot of, flipping through the various Bat books and reminding myself about, particular episodes and arcs to get anywhere near an answer. So I kind of don't blame people for jumping on that one, but let's see what we can do with it.
Okay, so what was your answer?
Well, my answer was Catwoman goes to college, Batman displays his knowledge. And while there are, great things about that arc, and of course there's the amazing, largely, single take or very few shot scene with Batman and Catwoman kind of, arguing / flirting / sparring romantically and otherwise in Green Hornet's apartment, right? Isn't that the same set?
Green Hornet's house.
Right. The Freddy the Fence stuff with Jacques Bergerac is just awful. I think what I would do is just be a better script editor than Charles Hoffman was, and just get rid of that, the whole Freddy the Fence thing, because he leaps in, he's a fencer, ha-ha, and he's also a fence, ha-ha-ha. It's like a one-trick joke. There's no, the pony comes on and, does his bow and then leaves. He's not even in the first episode of the arc. So I think he ends up being really distracting. It seems as though, Burt and Adam were off, showing off the Batmobile at some car show that weekend or something, or that week. And so they had to fill in. They had to fill in with something. And it seems like such a non sequitur. I think those episodes, more or less redeem themselves. There's a great trap. There's, the coffee cup trap on the roof, the animated billboard or advertising thingamabob. But that ending has to make up for the problem of a big chunk of the second episode being largely stolen by Freddy the Fence. He was much better. Jacques Bergerac was much better on Mary Tyler Moore, in my opinion. No, well, yeah, he was on that as well, but I guess I'm thinking of his
Dick Van Dyke show?
His Dick Van Dyke appearance, where he appears to be the lost French lover of Laura's past. What do you think?
The first thing that occurred to me, and I couldn't think of a better answer, was Marcia's scheme of diamonds. And okay, maybe it's not all that good to start with. It's far from the simply an ideal. But even if you take it on its own sitcom-y terms, it's not that great.
Right.
This story wouldn't pass muster even over at Bewitched. But
where their standards were lower on some registers and higher on others, it seems, at least in terms of the sitcom department.
But what really gets to me is the Toad business. I mean, I figured out what they're trying to do there, but just, I don't know, the idea that Gordon and O'Hara entertained the idea that Batman and Robin are really toads. It's just...
Yeah.
So
I would have to agree. So I didn't really come up with a way of improving my chosen arc except to just ask, Bergerac to leave very respectfully but firmly. But I don't know what I would do to fill in.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts about what you would do to repair that episode?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
So the thing that I noticed beyond the toads is that in part 2, Marcia is fixated on revenge on Batman for leaving her at the altar, and she doesn't actually commit any crimes other than off-screen confining the duo to a cage that they break out of. So instead, how about having her continue the modus operandi of part 1? She puts Mayor Linseed under her power, uses him to steal some other jewels, then makes him demand the arrest of Batman and Robin on some trumped-up charge. Batman and Robin are brought in, and Linseed and Marcia and her men are in Gordon's office when they're brought in. They're handcuffed, but somehow they manage to administer an antidote to Linseed, maybe some kind of powder they throw in his face. And now that he's himself again, the mayor demands that the duo be unhandcuffed, and a bat fight breaks out in Gordon's office, which is something we never got in the series. Amazingly. Of course, it would be stupid on the Crook's part to get in a fight in the police station. But it's still better than the Toad business, so...
Right. Well, and even without a bat fight, although now that you've, kind of whet my appetite for a bat fight in Gordon's office, I find the image irresistible. They could, there would still, the only expense that they would have to cut, I suppose, and maybe it would be a fairly high expense, relatively speaking, if they were to redo the scene in Gordon's office that way, would be nobody would have to create a costume for either Bat Frog or Robin Frog. It must have cost something. And to dress the frogs.
Yeah, frog wardrobe.
Pretty time intensive. But even without a fight, they could still wrap the episode up right there in Gordon's office without, really skipping a beat. And it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be exorbitantly expensive either. And that would be a lot more satisfying, actually, to have her continue her, her same, crime wave, specifically the way that she has been undertaking it so far.
Yeah, and much less Aunt Hilda.
Right. Yes, much less. Yeah, let's send Freddie the Fence and Aunt Hilda off to, get married themselves, right? Since there's a church in this episode, we could maybe just send them off to it.
So, listeners, our next Bat question: who should have had a window cameo, and what would they have said to the duo?
This will be fun. There are lots and lots of ham actors, but also, unexpected faces from 60s television and film that we haven't thought about to have pop out the window.
So we've been polling our patrons at patreon.com/deconcomics about upcoming episodes. We gave them 4 episode idea choices, and they chose the topic of the costumes on the show. So next time we'll be talking with Chuck and Lynn Williams, who are both former Hollywood professionals who have tried to reverse engineer how the costumes were made and gotten to examine some of the actual costumes and made replicas of them.
I wonder if they had anything to do with the show that I saw in LA a few years ago that, I did a patron video for. I think we should ask them about that. I'll dig up my information about that exhibit in the Hollywood Museum and see what they know about it and about its accuracy and the costumes that get reconstructed. At least some of them were apparently costumes right out of the wardrobe from the show, and others were reconstructions that seemed pretty faithful, at least on the face of it. So, something else to ask them.
Okay. Also, we polled our patrons on which script we should cover next. And out of the 4 choices we offered them, the winner was, drumroll, His Honor the Penguin.
Yeah!
So we have a treatment, a first draft, and a final. And those will be in the show notes of this episode, so you can check them out ahead of time and comment on the script thread on the board or via email. So listen at the end for all the ways you can contact us.
Yes, and please do, because that episode in particular, there's a lot to say about it in terms of contemporary politics and the kind of parodic politics that it puts forward, as well as just characterization. So it'd be terrific to have, some comments and some ideas about what to talk about.
Yeah, and so then we'll talk about that episode after next, after we talk with the Williams. So we'll see you next time at the same Bat RSS feed. Thanks for listening. Check the show notes for the videos and articles we discussed and the theme version by that Japanese four-piece surf band on the channel on YouTube. If you have any interesting Bat audio that we haven't used yet on the show, or you'd like to make a donation to the show through PayPal, or just drop us a line, the address is batpoles@deconstructingcomics.com. You can also comment on the thread for each episode and each script at 66batman.com/forums, or on our blog at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. We're on Twitter at DeconComics, and on the Deconstructing Comics channel on YouTube. You can hear outtakes from this and every episode of To the Batpoles and vote for topics for future episodes by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics. You can also help us out by shopping via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, by sharing our episodes on your social media, and by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And spread the word. Let all your friends who are Batman 66 fans know about the show. Next time, we talk Bat wardrobe with former Hollywood pros Chuck and Lynn Williams. And no, a wardrobe is not Dick Grayson's bathrobe. See you in 2 weeks. To the Batpoles is a production of DeconstructingComics.com.